Welcome, the anointed ones. The devil doesn't come with horns. He comes with a plan, a smile, and receipts forged in flattery. They thought they had you. Not maybe, not possibly. They were so confident, they already picked out the outfit they'd wear to your downfall. But what they didn't know is that a chosen one doesn't walk blindly into a trap. A chosen one studies the footsteps leading to it, senses the energy behind it, and scans the invisible ink written between every word. And oh, you saw it all. The tone shifts, the scripted kindness, the overly generous offers, the sudden spotlight, the strange coincidences. They built it perfectly. But you read the spirit behind it, not the presentation of it. Here's a wild fact for you. Studies in psychology show that people with high empathy often become expert lie detectors, not because they're paranoid, but because they read micro-expressions and emotional shifts others can't even see. Translation? They played the wrong game with the wrong soul. And now they're furious. Why? Because their plan didn't just fail, it failed publicly. They were counting on your silence, your confusion, your tears. But instead, you gave them stillness, clarity, and that terrifying smile that says, "I saw you the whole time." So buckle up, because in this video, we're about to break down the spiritual blueprint of betrayal, the trap that was tailor-made to destroy you, and how you flipped it like a reverse UNO card straight from heaven. And don't worry, we're not sugarcoating a thing. This isn't candy, it's straight fire. Let's get into it. Number 1. They mistook your sensitivity for stupidity, but you were reading the blueprint in real time. They mistook your sensitivity for stupidity. They thought because you listened more than you spoke, you didn't know what was going on. They saw the way you cared about people, how you gave them the benefit of the doubt, and assumed you were slow, gullible, and easy to manipulate. But what they never realized was that you were tracking everything, not just with your ears, but with your spirit. While they were performing, lying, scheming behind your back, you were absorbing patterns, every inconsistency, every weird energy shift, every fake laugh and side-eye. You weren't clueless. You were collecting evidence in silence, and they thought they had you wrapped around their fingers simply because you didn't expose them immediately. But you saw it all. Not just what they said, but what they meant. Not just what they did, but what they intended. You weren't emotional. You were decoding spiritual warfare in real time. They didn't know that your silence wasn't confusion, it was calculation. You were playing a longer game. You weren't trying to win arguments or prove them wrong. You were letting them walk deeper into their own mess, because you knew the moment you confronted them too early, they'd twist it, deny it, and make you look crazy. So you waited. You watched. You smiled. You let them think they were winning. They studied your behavior. You studied their soul. That's why they're furious now, because when you finally moved, when you finally pulled the curtain back, you didn't just expose one little lie. You exposed the whole system they built around deceiving you. And it wasn't a dramatic meltdown, it wasn't revenge. It was clean, calm, and surgical. The same softness they mistook for weakness is what made your blow so deadly. Because when a chosen one finally speaks on what they saw, it's already too late to spin it. They thought you were dumb because you didn't react like they wanted. But you weren't dumb. You were 10 steps ahead. And now that they know you knew the whole time, they're not just embarrassed. They're scared. Because if you caught this, they're wondering what else you saw, and what else you're still keeping to yourself. Number 2, you let them finish the setup, so there'd be no escape from exposure. You let them finish the setup, not because you were unaware, but because you were aware of everything. You saw the plan unfolding step by step, and instead of stopping them, you watched it all play out. They thought you were blind. They thought you were being lured in. But you knew exactly what they were doing, and you let them keep going. Why? Because you understood one thing they didn't. Exposure requires completion. If you had called them out too early, they would have denied everything, played dumb, flipped the narrative. They'd have called you paranoid or dramatic. And worst of all, they would have gotten away with it again. So you let them think they were winning. You let them drop their mask all the way. You let them build their trap so well that they wouldn't be able to untangle themselves from it when the truth finally hit. You saw how they coordinated, the fake concern, the forced generosity, the sudden interest in your life. You knew it was staged. You picked up on the energy behind their words, how it didn't match their body language, and instead of confronting it, you stayed silent. You didn't interrupt the movie. You let the full plot develop. Because you knew the more rope they had, the deeper they'd hang themselves. And now, they can't explain it away. It's too detailed, too obvious, too calculated. Their hands are dirty and there's no wiping them clean. And that's what makes them furious, because not only did their plan fail, but they realize you watched them the entire time, like a mirror they couldn't crack. And while they were setting the stage to see you fall, they ended up putting a spotlight on themselves. You didn't fall into the trap. You let them build it around their own feet, and when it collapsed, they weren't prepared for the fact that you'd already made peace with walking away. That's what's driving them crazy. You didn't react. You didn't beg. You didn't fight to stay. You walked out with clarity while they stood there with guilt they can't explain, evidence they can't delete, and a story they can't control. Number 3. The trap was tailored to your old self, but you're not that person anymore. The trap they set for you wasn't random. It was designed based on the version of you they used to know. The one that craved love so much you tolerated disrespect. The one that stayed quiet just to keep the peace. The one that ignored the red flags because you didn't want to start over again. That's who they targeted. That's the version they tailored the setup for. But there's just one problem. You outgrew that person without telling them. They studied your past, not your present. They didn't realize you had evolved behind the scenes. They had no idea the pain they caused was the same pain that trained you to see straight through people like them. You had already gone through too much to fall for the same pattern again. While they were plotting based on old data, you were living with updated discernment, stronger boundaries, and a mindset that couldn't be manipulated by sweet words or familiar faces. They thought they could bait you with the same tactics, false promises, guilt trips, fake loyalty, or trauma bonding. They thought if they reminded you of your old self, you'd shrink back into it just to be accepted. But you didn't. You stood in your growth, even if it meant walking away from people you once would have died to keep. And when you didn't react the way they expected, it threw everything off. They were expecting the emotional version of you, the overly forgiving, overly understanding version. They were counting on the person who would have explained herself, second-guessed her instincts, and taken the blame just to fix everything. But that person no longer exists. And that's exactly why their plan failed. They set the trap for a ghost. And you showed up as someone they've never been able to manipulate. Now they're not just angry, they're confused. They're sitting in the wreckage of a plan that was supposed to break you, wondering how it all fell apart. But deep down, they know the truth. You didn't fall for it because you're not that person anymore. Growth saved you, maturity saved you, and God's hand on your life made sure the setup didn't match the strength you quietly built in the dark. Number 4, they weaponized what they knew about you. But you used what they ignored about you. They weaponized what they knew about you. They used the pieces of your past like ammunition. Your childhood trauma, your insecurities, the times you trusted too fast, the mistakes you made when you didn't know any better. They took all of it and tried to turn it into a strategy. They thought if they pressed on those same wounds, you would react the same way you used to. That's what they were counting on. Your predictable pain response. They brought up your family history, the dysfunction, the silence, the abandonment. They figured if they mirrored those patterns, you would go numb again. They studied your emotional habits, your attachment style, your fears, and they built a trap around those pieces of you that used to break under pressure. But here's what they didn't expect. You studied yourself too, and you did it deeper, with healing in mind, not manipulation. While they were obsessed with the version of you that cried for closure, you were busy becoming the version of you that no longer needed their apology. They thought you still needed them for validation, for support, for love. But what they ignored, or just never saw, was that you had built a quiet foundation with God. You stopped running in circles, and started walking in purpose. That shift was invisible to them because they only watched your actions, not your spirit. You flipped the script with what they never studied: your discernment, your ability to sense energy, your self-awareness. The fact that you don't need to argue to be right anymore. The fact that you listen with your soul now, not just your ears. That's what they didn't expect. They were ready for a fight. You brought peace. They were ready for drama. You responded with silence. And not the weak kind, the kind that terrifies people who can't control you. They used what they thought they knew, but you won with what they never bothered to learn. Your power wasn't in the loudness of your comeback. It was in the calmness of your alignment. They underestimated everything they didn't take time to study, and that's why the weapon formed, but it didn't prosper. Number 5. You didn't just outsmart them. You unmasked the puppet masters behind them. You didn't just outsmart the people in front of you. You went deeper than they ever expected. While they were focused on baiting you, distracting you, or pulling emotional strings, you were tracing the strings back to the source. This wasn't just about dodging drama or cutting off toxic relationships. This was about discernment at the highest level. You didn't just see what they were doing. You saw who was behind it. The moves were too calculated, the timing was too specific, the patterns were too familiar. You started picking up on spiritual fingerprints. Certain conversations felt off. Certain people showed up at key moments with the same empty script. You weren't just being targeted by individuals. You were being tested by something bigger. And while most people would have gotten caught up in the emotions of betrayal, you kept quiet and watched the strategy unfold. You started realizing that some of these people were not thinking for themselves. They were being used, spiritually hijacked. Whether through witchcraft, ancestral debt, generational strongholds, or soul ties, they were carrying out orders they didn't fully understand. They were pawns, being moved by forces that have been studying your bloodline for years. That's why the attacks felt so personal. That's why they knew just where to hit. But here's where everything shifted. You stopped reacting and started observing. You stopped looking at the insult and started looking at the assignment behind it. And when you did, the mask slipped. You saw the handlers, the invisible influences, the spirits of jealousy, sabotage, and monitoring. You caught the real enemy, and you didn't flinch. You realized this wasn't just a relational issue. This was spiritual warfare dressed in human skin. And that's when you stopped playing defense. You stopped trying to fix people who were never meant to be fixed. You started praying with strategy, declaring with fire, and walking away without guilt. You didn't just survive their manipulation. You exposed the entire network of energy working behind the scenes. Now they're not just mad that you didn't fall. They're terrified that you saw. Because once you see the puppeteer, the game is over. And they know you saw everything. Number 6. They built the perfect performance. But you had the script before opening night. They really thought they had you fooled. Every word they spoke was rehearsed. Every action was timed. Every gesture, every expression, every concern they showed was part of a carefully crafted performance. They were acting, and acting well. Playing the victim, the hero, the friend, the supporter. Behind the scenes, they were setting you up to fail while pretending they had your back. And to anyone else watching, it probably looked convincing. But what they didn't know was that you already had the script. You saw the betrayal coming before the first line was even delivered. The Holy Spirit had already revealed things to you in silence, in dreams, in gut feelings, in sudden shifts in your spirit that you couldn't ignore. You didn't have physical proof at first, but spiritually, the confirmation was loud and clear. So you watched, and you waited. You weren't surprised when the lies started unfolding. You weren't caught off guard when they twisted your words or when people suddenly turned on you. You had already seen it. You already knew how it would play out. You just let it happen. Not because you were weak, but because you were letting them fully reveal themselves. You knew if you reacted too soon, they'd spin it, so you gave them the stage, gave them the audience, let them perform their drama until the end. They planted props, false evidence, fake text messages, misleading conversations. They tried to control the narrative, but you didn't need to defend yourself because the truth was on its own clock. And you understood something powerful. When God gives you foresight, Your job isn't to interrupt the play. It's to let it run its course so justice has all the evidence it needs. You never belonged on their stage anyway. The moment you saw the script, you detached. You emotionally clocked out while they thought they were still holding your attention. And when the final scene came, you didn't clap. You didn't cry. You walked off their stage without a word because you already knew how it ended. And you were done letting people audition for roles in a story God never wrote for them. Number 7. You let the snake slither closer so you could chop its head with precision. You knew exactly what was happening the moment the shift began. The tone changed. The energy got strange. The silence got suspicious. You could feel the betrayal brewing. Not from paranoia, but from the kind of spiritual alertness that can't be taught. But instead of reacting, you did something they weren't expecting at all. You stayed still. You let them come closer. You let them think you were clueless. You let them believe they had you exactly where they wanted you. They thought your stillness was weakness. They thought your quietness was fear. But it wasn't. It was timing. You weren't just reacting emotionally. You were calculating. You were watching how they moved, how they lied, how they coordinated with others behind your back. You were tracking it all without saying a word. And while they thought they were wrapping you tighter in their scheme, you were just waiting for the perfect moment to strike. You understood something most people don't. It's not about reacting first, it's about hitting right. You didn't need to expose them prematurely. You didn't need to scream or beg for the truth to come out. You waited until the trap was clear, the pattern was undeniable, and the evidence couldn't be denied. Then you moved, quickly, decisively, without warning. They didn't see it coming. That's what shook them. You flipped the entire situation in seconds. One move from you dismantled everything they had been building in secret. Because while they were banking on your emotions, you were sitting on strategy. You weren't asleep. You were watching. And when the moment was right, you cut it at the root. Now they're left confused, embarrassed, scrambling. Because they thought they had more time. They thought they could keep manipulating you, keep pretending, keep slithering undetected. But you let the snake get close on purpose, not to entertain it, but to eliminate it with precision. You didn't strike out of rage, you struck out of revelation. And that's what makes it sting even more. Because deep down, they know the truth. You were never in the dark. You were just letting them walk into the light where every hidden thing had to be revealed. Number 8. They counted on your kindness to keep you quiet. But you chose divine justice over pleasing people. They thought you'd never speak. They were sure your kindness would keep you quiet. They believed you'd bite your tongue just to keep the peace, just to avoid conflict, just to protect their reputation. And for a while you did. You gave them the benefit of the doubt. You let things slide. You told yourself it wasn't worth the drama. You kept secrets that were never yours to carry because you didn't want to be the one to ruin everything. But it wasn't peace you were protecting. It was their image. And deep down you knew it. You felt it in your spirit every time you silenced yourself to keep others comfortable. They were hiding behind your goodness, using your silence as a shield while continuing their behavior in the dark. They were banking on the fact that you were too loyal, too loving, too Christian to ever call them out. That's where they miscalculated. Because you didn't just hit a breaking point, you hit a spiritual awakening. You realized that God didn't call you to be a peacekeeper. He called you to be a truth carrier. You saw that protecting wickedness in silence makes you a silent partner in it. That revelation hit deep, and once it did, everything changed. You stopped caring about keeping their image intact. You stopped protecting people who would never do the same for you. You stopped bowing to false loyalty and started standing in divine alignment. And that's when the fear set in for them. Because now, they couldn't control you with guilt. They couldn't manipulate you with fake love. They couldn't hide behind your silence anymore. When you started choosing truth over comfort, obedience over image, justice over pretending, it shook them. Not because you exposed them with vengeance, but because you did it with clarity, calm, confidence, the kind that comes from God. You didn't lash out. You didn't retaliate. You stood in what was right and let the light do what it always does. expose what was never supposed to be hidden. They never expected you to speak, but you did. And it wasn't loud, it was righteous. That's what hit hardest. You didn't destroy their image. The truth did. Number 9, they tried to trigger a reaction, but you triggered their revelation instead. They did everything they could to make you crack. They poked at old wounds, brought up sensitive topics, used passive aggression, and even tried to humiliate you subtly in front of others. They needed you to snap. That was the goal, not to hurt you directly, but to provoke you into a reaction they could weaponize. They wanted you to lose control so they could point and say, "See? That's the real them." They needed a scene. They needed chaos. They needed you to become the villain in the story they were already writing behind your back. But you didn't give them what they wanted. You felt the pressure. You saw the setup. But instead of reacting, you held your ground. You stayed centered. You let your silence and stillness speak louder than any outburst ever could. And that's what broke them, because they weren't prepared for your peace. They thought they knew your triggers. They didn't know your healing had unplugged them. What they didn't realize is that your self-control was not suppression. It was strategy. You weren't holding back because you were scared. You were holding back because you knew exactly what they were trying to do. And you refused to give them a shortcut to a false narrative. And when you stayed calm, when you responded with grace instead of rage, their own behavior started looking suspicious. That's when everything turned. Your peace turned into a mirror. And suddenly, all the little tactics they were using became obvious to everyone around them. The more you stayed composed, the more they started unraveling. Their tone got sharper. Their stories started contradicting. Their mask began to slip. And what was meant to be your exposure turned into their revelation. Now, people are seeing them for who they really are, not because you exposed them with your words, but because you let them expose themselves. Your restraint forced their desperation into the open. You didn't just win the moment, you revealed the truth, without yelling, without accusing, just by refusing to be manipulated. And that's what they hate most. You didn't play their game, you flipped the board. And now they're standing in the spotlight they tried to put on you. Number 10, they designed the setup, but God rewrote the ending mid-scene. They thought they had the perfect ending planned. Every step was mapped out, from the betrayal to the fallout, from the whispers behind your back to the final blow that was supposed to break you. It was all carefully crafted like a scripted drama. They even timed it to hit when you were most vulnerable. They wanted the climax to be your collapse. They wanted tears, rage, isolation, the whole meltdown. That was the payoff they were waiting for, but something happened that they didn't plan for. God stepped in mid-scene. Right when it looked like the narrative was going their way, the entire plot shifted. Doors they thought they closed on you swung back open. People they convinced to walk away from you started questioning everything. The pain they intended to use to destroy you became the very fire that refined you. Instead of a breakdown, you had a breakthrough. And what they tried to hide started surfacing on its own. They weren't ready for that kind of divine intervention. They assumed that because they orchestrated the setup, they controlled the outcome. But they forgot something crucial. You're not the main character in their story. You're the chosen vessel in God's. And no scheme, no sabotage, no manipulation can rewrite what heaven already authored. While they were busy directing a scene they thought would end in your humiliation, God flipped the script. You didn't just survive, you elevated. You didn't just recover, you transformed. And the same setup they used to trap you ended up being the very platform that exposed them. Their plan turned into their mirror, and every hidden intention started revealing itself in plain sight. Your response wasn't revenge, it was alignment. While they were plotting from ego, you were walking in purpose. That's why the shift happened so quickly, because divine justice doesn't always come with thunder. Sometimes it comes through sudden peace, through unexpected favor, through silent vindication that nobody can block. Now they're the ones confused. Not just because you didn't fall, but because you rose without warning. And in rising, you showed everyone watching that when God rewrites the ending, not even the best liars can control the narrative. Number 11, you were never meant to fall. You were meant to document the whole operation. You were never meant to fall. That was never the plan, even though the setup looked like it was designed to crush you. It felt personal, intentional, overwhelming, and it was. But what you didn't know in the beginning was that God didn't position you there to be broken. He positioned you to see, to witness, to document. You were placed right in the middle of it, not because you were weak, but because you were spiritually equipped to handle the truth that others would deny, avoid, or excuse. What they thought would ruin you actually gave you clarity. Every lie revealed another layer. Every betrayal showed you how deep the rot really went. Every silence from those who should have defended you proved who was truly aligned with you, and who was just along for the ride. You weren't just surviving it, you were studying it. You were learning the system, the patterns, the unspoken agreements that kept toxicity hidden behind smiles and fake unity. And you didn't just learn from it, you internalized it. That's why they couldn't shake you like they expected. Because while they were trying to manipulate your emotions, God was strengthening your discernment. You stopped asking, "Why me?" and started seeing the assignment. You were sent in as a witness, not a casualty. God allowed the betrayal not to destroy you, but to show you how deep the corruption went. He knew you wouldn't turn a blind eye. He knew you would remember the details, and he knew that when the time came, your memory would serve as evidence. Not in a petty way, but in a prophetic way. You weren't meant to take revenge. You were meant to testify with truth no one could deny. Now they're uncomfortable around you, not because you're bitter, but because you know. You carry the full picture. You remember who said what, who played along, who stayed silent. You don't need receipts. You are the receipt. Your life, your healing, your freedom, it all exposes what was done to you. You're not wounded. You're not broken. You're walking evidence that the trap didn't work, that God covered you, that you were built for the mission, not the mess. And now that you've made it out, your presence alone convicts every soul that had a hand in trying to bury you. Number 12. You smiled through the setup, and that's what drove them mad. They thought they had you cornered. Everything was in place, the lies, the distractions, the people they planted around you. From the outside, it looked like you were walking straight into a trap, and they were sure this was going to be your downfall. They were waiting for panic, for confusion, for fear in your eyes. But instead, you smiled. That smile wasn't out of ignorance. It wasn't the smile of someone who didn't understand what was going on. It was the smile of someone who knew everything, and chose peace anyway. They couldn't process that. It rattled them. Because your smile didn't match the scene they had set. You weren't supposed to look calm. You weren't supposed to carry that kind of quiet confidence. But you did. And that's when they started to realize they had made a huge mistake. Your smile said what your mouth didn't have to. It said, "I see through all of this." It said, "You are not in control here." It said, "God already showed me how this ends." And that's what drove them mad. Because deep down, they were hoping that fear would disarm you. But instead, your peace disarmed them. They couldn't figure out how you weren't breaking, how you weren't flinching, how you were still showing up, still shining, still treating them with grace while being fully aware of the betrayal behind the curtain. And that smile, that simple, quiet smile, exposed everything. It wasn't weakness. It was warfare. It was you letting them know that no weapon formed against you was going to prosper. Not today, not ever. What they didn't expect was that you were prophetic. You had already seen the ending, maybe not in detail, but in spirit. You knew God had already turned it around. So your smile wasn't for them. It was for what you knew was coming. It was for the victory they couldn't stop, no matter how perfect the setup seemed. Now they're left trying to figure out how the whole thing fell apart, and why you never even broke a sweat. But the truth is simple. You were never afraid. You saw them, you saw the trap, and you smiled. Because deep inside, you knew they were never the ones holding the power. Number 13. You saw the energetic shift before the physical betrayal. You didn't need anyone to tell you something was off. Long before the betrayal showed up in words or actions, you felt it in the atmosphere. Something shifted. It wasn't loud or obvious, it was subtle. A pause that didn't feel natural, a tone that carried a strange coldness, a silence that used to feel safe but suddenly felt loaded. You couldn't explain it at first, but your spirit picked it up immediately. The energy changed, and so did your posture. They hadn't done anything yet. On the surface, everything looked the same. The conversations still flowed, the laughs were still there, but something underneath was broken. That deep sense of connection, gone. The frequency was no longer matching. You could feel the tension rising like a wave that hadn't yet crashed. And that's when you knew. The betrayal wasn't coming. It had already started in their heart. That's the part they didn't understand. They thought they could hide it until they were ready to act. They thought they could fake the love, fake the loyalty, fake the presence. But your spirit is too alert for that. You weren't operating on surface level. You were discerning on a level that has nothing to do with facial expressions or tone. You were catching signals that had nothing to do with the natural and everything to do with the spiritual. The betrayal didn't surprise you, because the energy behind it showed up first. In hesitation, in strange distance, in over-explaining, in sudden shifts in how they treated you. It wasn't just a gut feeling. It was revelation. God was giving you an internal alarm before anything physical could catch you off guard. You saw it coming, not because you were suspicious, but because you were spiritually aware. And that awareness gave you time. Time to prepare, time to protect your peace, time to start emotionally detaching from something that was already turning on you. So when the mask finally dropped, you weren't devastated. You were ready. They thought they caught you off guard. But what they don't know is that the betrayal had already played in your spirit days, even weeks before it happened in real life. You didn't just feel it. You accepted it. And that is why it didn't destroy you. Number 14. They're furious because they failed at something they were certain would break you. They didn't throw this together overnight. This wasn't some messy emotional outburst or a random betrayal. This was crafted, studied, designed with precision. They put time into this, thought into this, pride into this. This trap was supposed to be the final blow, the one that would take you out for good, the one that would silence you, discredit you, isolate you, and humiliate you. They layered it with lies, covered it with charm, and backed it with gossip in every corner they could reach. This was their masterpiece, the thing they believed would finally break you. They were sure of it, confident, even arrogant. They had rehearsed the aftermath in their mind. They imagined your collapse, your reaction, your fall from grace. They thought the pressure would crush you, that the betrayal would make you spiral, that the smear campaign would make everyone turn on you. They wanted people to doubt you, distance themselves, and watch you unravel while they stood in the shadows pretending they had nothing to do with it. But what they didn't plan for was your survival. Not only did you survive, but you did it with a strength they didn't think you had. You didn't beg. You didn't break. You didn't lose your mind. You stood still. You got quiet. You let God fight. And slowly, the very plan they built began to turn on them. The lies started cracking. The slander stopped sticking. People started seeing the truth, not because you defended yourself, but because your peace held longer than their performance. Now they're furious because it didn't work, because you're still here, still growing, still glowing, still favored, still walking in purpose, and worse. People are starting to ask questions. The mask is slipping. The guilt is showing. The story isn't holding up. And while they try to smile in public, they're haunted in private. Because they know what they did. And they know you know. That's the part that eats at them. You were supposed to be done, but you're rising. And every day you keep going. Every time you show your face, every moment you succeed. It reminds them of their failure. Not just in the plan, but in underestimating who you truly are. They built the perfect trap. They studied your past, exploited your heart, rehearsed their betrayal, and even involved spiritual forces to try and bring you down. They were sure this was it, the moment you'd finally collapse. But instead of watching you break, they witnessed something terrifying. You rose. Not in rage, not in chaos, but in revelation, in clarity, and in power. You didn't just survive the setup. You outgrew it. You outsmarted it. You saw through it with divine insight that made their entire operation fall apart mid-scene. Because while they were studying your wounds, they ignored your wisdom. While they were mocking your kindness, they missed your covenant with God. And while they were waiting for your breakdown, you were already preparing for your next breakthrough. You didn't just expose the lies, you revealed the spirits behind them. You didn't just walk away, you walked out carrying evidence. You didn't just forgive, you outgrew the need for validation. That's why they're not just angry. They're afraid, because you didn't respond like a victim. You responded like someone who knew exactly what time it was in the spirit. Someone who understood that the setup was never meant to break you. It was meant to reveal them. And now, you've won in the most powerful way. Not by clapping back, not by stooping low, but by standing tall, with your peace, your purpose, and your name still intact. The trap failed, the weapon backfired, the mask cracked, and the chosen one, untouched, unmoved, unshaken. Because in the end, the plot didn't crown them. It revealed you. If this message hit deep, if you saw yourself in every word, then this space was made for you. You're not crazy, you're not too sensitive, you're spiritually awake. And finally seeing things for what they are. So don't just watch and scroll, be part of this tribe. Hit that subscribe button so you never miss another truth-filled, spirit-led message like this. Like the video if it spoke to your soul. Comment below. I read every word and your story matters here. And if you know someone who's going through the same setup, the same spiritual warfare, share this with them. Let's stop suffering in silence and start standing in power, together. This isn't just a channel. This is a movement for the chosen ones. Let's wake the world up, one revelation at a time. God bless you.